Joe, you ready? Okay, let's go. All right, we'll call the meeting to order. And the first item on tonight's agenda is public comment. Joe, I'm looking at you. Nothing? Okay.
I'm in a little out of the loop, so I don't even have anything there.
Okay. Inadvertently left off the agenda was city update, so we're gonna do that, even though it's not on the agenda tonight. Eric?
Yes, I just wanted to do a brief update on I mentioned at the last meeting, there's a joint meeting with City Council, Planning Commission, and the Housing Commission at the Council's August 6th meeting. Really, the main purpose of that meeting is for the Housing Commission to discuss their recommendations on inclusionary housing and replacement ordinances with Council. There's not necessarily a direct role for the Planning Commission other than to be there to hear that discussion. So you are encouraged to attend if you're able, so you can hear firsthand what the discussion is going to be about, because ultimately we will be tasked with developing those regulations going forward. So I just wanted to remind you all of that for that August 6th meeting of Council.
I'm gonna try to be there, but I have something at 7:15 or 7:30 that night.
Okay.
So maybe I can just drop Seth or Jesse an email asking if they could put that at the beginning of the agenda.
Sure. I know that's also going to be a public hearing for the pool, so yeah. So that might be important
Right.
to let them know that. I will be there, so I'll be getting the information firsthand myself.
I will, I plan to be there as well as the liaison for the Housing Commission.
Okay.
For us, I will try to take some notes and report back if anyone else cannot make it.
You won't
I
be
can't
sad
make it
if
that
it
night.
happens to be first though, right?
It would be great if it were.
So that was all I have
Okay.
for that update.
I'm able to come as well.
Great.
So
And I can't.
is it going to be at O'Brien Community Center?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be
Oh, it's
here.
gonna be
Yeah,
here?
I think it
Okay.
is. I think so.
I think I asked last,
Put that on my
council
schedule.
meetings start at 6 o'clock.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Got it.
Okay, next item, approve meeting minutes of July 12th. I have a motion in a second.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes for July 12th.
I guess I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is follow-up discussion, Economic Vitality Master Plan Chapter, including edits incorporated from discussion of 7/12/18 meeting.
All right, so I do have like some talking points that I'm gonna go through, so if it's helpful for you folks to have that, feel free, but don't feel like you have to look along, it's just if it's helpful to have that, then you go. All right, so economic vitality, sort of first thing up. Last time we talked about the vision statement, and specifically for this vision statement, we're spending a little time on it because the city council did have a question about whether small town feel was still right. So I put in here, the brand story, just so you've got it in close proximity to be able to sort of figure out if that helps you with this or not. Then you've got the original vision statement there, and then two options. My recommendation is option 2. I think it just helps succinctly get to the point. It's our city, not a city, not a small city, not a large city. And it doesn't have the sort of subjectiveness of small town feel. So that's my recommendation. The second option is there too, but that definitely is starting to get a bit away from what the whole sort of public input and getting to these vision statements to begin with. So it might be going a little sort of too far, but.
One of the things that Regina and I talked about in context of the master plan development is the potential of not even necessarily including these vision statements and tying them so directly to the strategic vision, at least in each section. So instead potentially putting the strategic vision statement with with that additional information in the introduction. So we can also include the brand story, we can include the strategic vision and talk about the context of when and how the strategic vision was developed, instead of trying to associate each section with that vision statement and maybe kind of disassociating it a little bit from the content, the actual text of the document, and more have it in the introduction of here's where we're coming from with this plan, and that's why we have the sections we do based on this community process to develop a strategic vision, instead of, again, waiting until each section to include that. So it's not, maybe doesn't set up the section quite as much of saying, well, here's what the vision is, so that's what I should expect in this section.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I do too.
think it- Yeah.
So that's something we can do, so we don't lose sight of the actual work that was done through the community process. We can also bring in, as Regina mentioned, the brand story with some of the branding and all of that in the introduction, and kind of put it in context of what and how it was developed.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Great.
All right, so with that, do we wanna sort of, think about this now, or do we wanna just sort of put it off until it gets in that other form? Introduction chapter.
I just soon put it off until it gets into that form, but that's just me.
I agree with Mike.
I mean, I'll state my opinion, which is I agree with Regina's recommendation. I think version 2 fits the best, and I think it's a good compromise from our conversation during our last meeting, but I'm fine with tabling the final thing until later on in the process, especially because we are missing several numbers tonight.
Yep.
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood you, because were you talking about going through this and waiting for this until it's incorporated, or just that vision?
Just
statement?
those options for the vision statement, like, we can talk about those options if they feel right tonight, or we'll see them again when they get incorporated into the introduction chapter, and we can discuss it at that time.
Okay, I thought you were talking about the whole chapter thing.
And you were like, yeah, another time.
Yeah, another-
Oh, so then I don't agree with Mike. I agree that we should discuss this when we get to this part.
Yeah, I agree with Terry on this one. But I also, as Pala said, I like option 2.
Okay. Awesome. All right, so last time you did not have an introduction in this chapter. Generally, does that work for folks?
I thought it was nice and succinct. Brought us from 1700 to the present in 2 paragraphs. 3 paragraphs. So it's not even worth mentioning, but the 3rd paragraph in 2004, that's when we got the TIF, I think that's when we got the TIF approved and the financing started.
Okay.
The project actually started earlier than that.
Right, like the whole thing
The whole
started
planning,
earlier.
it started 99, 2000. But I don't think it's a big deal if you keep 2004, because that's when the financing, that's when we got the TIF
Okay.
approved.
There will be, like more of a visual historic timeline in the introduction that gives a little bit more of kind of what went on, when the mills went down, then what happened in the 70s and 80s, and then how you sort of got into this. So there'll be a little more.
That's gonna come in the
Right.
first
Yep,
chapter, yeah.
Yeah. All right, I did hear from downtown Winooski, they're okay with us using that photo, but they don't know who took it, but they said, go ahead and use it. Just a note for that.
So is it, are we talking about this photo?
That photo, we have permission, because somebody in my office took it, but the next page,
Page
Okay.
13.
That one right there?
Oh,
Yeah.
this one.
yeah. we don't need to decide if we want to use it or if we wanna use it right there at the moment, but just so you know, since I had it highlighted, we do have permission.
Okay.
Did you look at, there was a photo someplace of it superimposed
side by
of
side.
the old and the new.
Yeah,
I think, I don't know if Dan Higgins did that or who did
I
that.
believe that's correct.
Yeah,
I believe that is who did that, yeah.
that's kind of a neat picture.
Yeah.
yeah,
And
it's,
maybe that's for the intro.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's where I put a placeholder for it
Yeah,
now.
okay.
But yeah, that picture's super cool, so we'll definitely make use of it. All right, so moving on to, economic insights page, so there's two, bullets in here to talk about, sorry, I just gotta get to it. At the last meeting, Abby asked for a little bit more detail on this, the need for square feet of office space.
You're on page 15?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. I'm like making this more difficult for myself because I'm in the Word document instead of the PDF. But, so she wanted to know, that's interesting, but it doesn't mean a whole lot without sort of some context of where we are today. You know, what is our need, how much space do we have? So I looked into, Allen Brooks and Minor, they do lots of research on real estate in the region, and they come out with a report every 6 months. So those numbers, based on the square footage and the surrounding areas, is what we've got now. But they also talked about, generally, we've been a bit oversupplied on office space for a number of years. So in reading that, I was a little bit like, I'm not quite sure how real this need will be in the future. And I
So-
see you shaking your head.
Yeah.
Where did that 380,000 new square feet of office space will be needed come from exactly?
The economic development plan.
But where, do you know what their source was in determining that
Our
number?
economic development plan or a regional one?
Your economic development plan. A lot of their data, they used some forecasting from Esri Insights, which is, Esri is the company that does ArcGIS. It's a lot of like sort of data, mapping data stuff. So I don't necessarily want to say that's inaccurate, but Allen, Brooks and Minor, they're doing like real-time counts and sort of keeping on top of what's going on here in this region pretty accurately. So I'm guessing that
That would be a pretty big hole in our economic development report if that, because they're basically giving us a recommendation for how they see potential in our area, so I would have hoped that they had looked into it in some depth. But I'd also be curious, the Allen Brooks and Minor report, that is a regional report rather than a local analysis
No,
of
it's-
oversupply, or,
No, it's a Chittenden County report.
but, okay.
Yeah.
But I guess I'd be curious too in terms of trends of office supply moving into more urban environments versus suburban trends, because that might be another thing that they may have been factoring in
yeah.
that.
Well, I think they're probably factoring in that the economic, whoever did that, the projection, it's just like doing population estimates and housing estimates. They expect that population's gonna go like this, employment's gonna go like this, so to meet that, you need this kind of office space. And right now, we do have a glut of office space. Will that change? Who knows, it's gonna be a while. Personally, I think it would be just as telling in this report to say there are, whatever it is, 3 million square feet of office space in Chittenden County. Here's how it breaks out, or here's Winooski's share, something like that.
right.
Because we're not gonna, because we're all built out, we're not gonna see, if we do need 380,000 square feet of office space in Chittenden County, it ain't happening in Winooski. Some will.
I
but
mean,
not-
there is potential for some office space development in Winooski.
Yeah, but it's not gonna be huge.
True. But I suppose we need to if we put the statement in about, that was originally written about new office space will be needed, then we are trying to attract people to build office space. If we don't say that, then that's not there, and I guess it comes down to what we're, what our goals are. But I mean, I would make the argument that, I mean, we certainly don't want high vacancy in the area. We don't want to be trying to attract something,
Right.
create oversupply. But on the other hand, I think we would like to see more vibrant businesses moving into our city.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe it can be framed without throwing in the 380,000, that, as the area continues to grow and office space is needed, we strive to maintain or increase our share, and here's what our share is now, something like that. And that way it leaves the door open, I think, for future growth, but also tells,
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting because this, we should keep this in the back of our mind as we get down into the goals section, because I think the concept of this plan is to stay a little bit high level, and it's like, we want more local businesses, and that can be industry, that could be office space, that can be retail, that can be, more restaurants. So we may not necessarily need to get down to this kind of like office versus industrial versus something else kind of new business. And still be, keep that concept forefront, like we are here, we're a great place to be kind of place.
Right. Although some specificity at times could help us achieve greater goals. I was just thinking about, we've talked about becoming a tech hub before, for example.
Right.
In order to be a tech hub, you gotta have office space to attract tech companies, and even stating somewhere, like we wanna be this tech hub, we wanna create more office space for tech companies to be able to benefit from our, urban environment, whatever, that can
Right.
be a positive thing for us to achieve that goal. So,
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're as Regina just mentioned, in the goals, not to jump ahead, but goal 5 kind of gets to that notion of targeting economic development resources towards high priority industries that demonstrate regional and local employment opportunities. So in just kind of keeping it at that higher level, so we may, this is good data, and I think it's important to have data points that talk about specifics, but because we're only talking about the office breakout here, it's kind of
Right.
only one piece of the picture, so.
Sure, I think,
So-
I guess I agree. I mean, this might not be the place to go into that
Right.
for sure. Although, once we get to this goal area, I do think we have to think about what level of specificity we want. And I think if we really do wanna be a tech hub, being willing to be bold enough to say, we wanna be a tech hub, may be an important messaging piece that we wanna convey in this
Right.
plan.
So
if that
maybe-
is what we want.
So potentially as an option, instead of listing the specific numbers for office, maybe we wanna look at the various sectors that are important. So like talking about, tech is gonna be important, retail is important, industry is important, whatever the case might be, that those are the types of uses that we're looking for to help diversify our economic impact on the region.
How recent are this, are this data?
In the red,
Yes.
that is just from, where are we now? July, from the June 2018 report.
Oh, that's new.
Yeah, it comes out in December and June of every year. Yeah.
So as we're talking about it, this section, retail, office, industry, it really is heaviest into office.
Mhm.
I think it needs to be,
More broad.
generalized, more broad.
Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. And this is, this section is gonna end up being much more, much less text and just some actual data points and an infographic. So we can do that, yeah. Like this whole section, we can just do a little bit more of like, these are the industries that exist in Winooski right now, percentage-wise, and just give a little bit more of a insight from that perspective, more broadly. I think that makes sense.
And then talk about future aspirations and the goals part.
Yeah.
Number 5, okay.
Yep. Okay, and then the bullet above this bullet, again, more specifically, we're gonna change a lot of this, and you won't see this text.
Sorry, on page 14, the one that starts with market capture, is that the bullet you're referring to?
Yes.
Or the one that starts with market capture regardless of what page you're showing?
Yes.
Okay.
And there is a sentence at the end that talks about competition with Burlington.
So for the handouts that you have, it'll be on page 14, the very last sentence starting on page 14, continuing on to page 15.
Thank you. So we have deleted that sentence, but just keep in mind, we're gonna sort of reframe this whole part of it, so.
You're talking about the sentence that starts with additionally attempting to compete?
Yep.
That sentence?
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I would, like, I think, like, the overall feel I get reading this section is like, and I think that sentence contributed to this, but it's more like, well, these could be opportunities, but here's why we might not have an edge in them. And it's more of like it doesn't really lay a very clear, strong path or vision. So I don't know exactly how to convey that, but I feel like we have to identify, and I don't remember exactly how it came across in the original economic development plan, but like convey where it is that we see an opportunity to stand out, and where we think, you know, I like to have a more positive framing. You know, we have our, you know, we've talked about the vibrant restaurant scene in the tech space, and the maybe distinguishing ourselves in the arts or entertainment space. I'd like to bring some of that content into this section so that we can lay out a more optimistic
Yeah.
kind of
The comment that I received was that last sentence is just very negative. That
Yeah.
like, hey, don't even bother trying to
Yeah.
mess around with those Burlingtonians.
especially when there's no alternative
Exactly.
presented.
Right.
To me, and this goes back to when we started down there, we really geared it towards identifying and going for retail and commercial services that would serve our population, as opposed to trying to, you know, and I'll say, compete with University Mall or downtown Burlington. But get retailers in here that can serve our population base, and that would include things that we've talked about, hardware store, grocery store, you know, et cetera.
And I also just want to point out, just to be clear, that sentence isn't something that Regina came up with. That was from the economic development
Yeah.
report. I just want to, just to make sure Regina doesn't get
You're
blamed for
forgiven.
anything.
Well, I don't, should the, sort of an assessment of our current restaurant scene and reputation for being a foodie destination be covered in this economic vitality section at all? I mean, that seems pretty critical to our downtown businesses, and it's a big subject of conversation we've had in the past. I know Mike's brought up, you know, that's been great for Winooski, and that's largely how we are seen by other communities as a place to go out to eat. Mike's brought up the fact that that can be something that can be great for a while, but doesn't necessarily stick around forever if you don't have something more to attract people to downtown. And so, like, in thinking about economic development, there's one, like, you know, writing about what that is and how to encourage it, but two, what are the other opportunities to make sure that that lasts, like, be it bringing in entertainment or other types of businesses into the downtown, so that you know, has some staying power. And I feel like, considering how important that aspect of our economy is to our reputation, it should be mentioned.
Yeah.
Probably should have brought this up last week, but didn't fully occur to me till reading it again.
That's fine, and you'll have more time too, so. Okay, awesome. That's really great feedback. So we'll definitely get that worked out. And so, On the infographic pieces, it's helpful to have these kind of conversations before I sort of hand it off to the person who's gonna do that. So this helps to really like tighten it up and figure out what we really wanna relay in there, and so that's awesome. Thank you. All right, so then down to the goals and objectives. To explain what's different from last time. So, if you recall, at the last time you saw this, we had pretty much everything that the economic development plan had in it, and it had 3 tiers of things. It had goals, it had objectives, and it had actions. So what I tried to do was just to bring this all to one kind of level of statement. And basically started with the goals that were in the economic development plan, and then tried to bring in some of the objectives up into that goal statement. So the red text that you see here is what's kind of pulled into those goal statements. Then the other idea is so that this isn't just kind of like a list of statements that are kind of sort of up here, elevated, kind of pie in the sky without any real context that people would, it's without discrete actions, you're kind of like, the audience is missing what you kind of mean by any of these. So the thought is to sort of make this much more visual and bring in like, whether it's a map or a chart or a photo of what is an example of an action underneath each of these. So that's the concept, and at the beginning of each of these sections, just being very clear that there are other plans that exist out there for Winooski where a lot more depth happens right at the start. So I'd love your thoughts on the statements themselves and the visual options. Whether you've got other thoughts.
So on one, we talked about, if I remember correctly, at the last meeting, staying away from specific things and our action items. So I'm wondering, instead of saying the Winooski Small Business Loan Program, which is a specific thing,
Yeah.
maybe say something about, available financing opportunities, or what's that? Resources, yeah, something, so, because if that program should change or drop,
Yeah.
but I think it's important that, yeah.
This isn't necessarily a direct response to that, but I guess, when we started this process, like, for those of us who were here, 6 months ago, a year ago, I mean, it actually started before that, but in our earlier conversations, there were certain things that some members of the commission were pretty excited about, and we felt like that was gonna be a core part of this document. Like, we talked about the arts district, or being a tech hub, or we had a number of other ideas. And I guess I think, like, looking at the level of specificity that we've gotten here, we're kind of opening the possibility that that could be a future conversation, but we're not like really like sticking a stake in the sand and saying like, we want an arts district.
Mm-hmm.
And there are reasons not to put a stake in the ground and like declare that. But I think we should really think about like what our high priorities are, things we really want to be made clear, to send a public message like this is something we want to happen, and then invite feedback on that topic when this goes out to the public so that they can comment like, yes, we do want an arts district. Because I feel like the way that this is phrased, we're not going to get feedback on that topic because it's more just like a
Broad.
yeah. So and obviously we can't go into depth on everything, but I just think that we should really think about where like what our like big priorities are, things that we do want to invite comment on, and be willing to sort of state some of them really directly.
Yeah.
Don't disagree, I'm just wondering, you brought up arts district. Would that be, that's one of these things that I think could be in a couple of different areas. So I'm wondering if it would be appropriate here or in the community services section.
Or both.
It could be
Or
Really both.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Pals. it sounded like it was something that was important when we started this process, and Heather was working on that, I think. So I think it should be in both places.
Right.
So one comment I would make, and I don't disagree with anything you've said, a lot of that detail where these particular items that are very important to the planning commission, we can build into the implementation program and be able to then point back and say, okay, to implement goal 2 in the economic vitality section, we're going to pursue an arts district.
When you're talking about the implementation program, you're talking about something that doesn't actually exist within this document.
It will actually, it's gonna be a part of the plan. There will be an implementation program that is part of the plan that talks about how we achieve these goals and objectives. So, that may be a way to get to those really specific items that are still, that there's been discussion, that there's been interest in and engagement in, and that way we can use the implementation program as a way to solicit the input from the community
So,
as well.
I guess this brings me back to some of our earlier conversations about what is a municipal plan and what's its function. And it has a lot of functions, and we talked about that, and different communities have kind of treated the document differently.
Mhm.
For some, it's very much of an internal document. I mean, it's publicly available, but it's used to kind of inform conversations and how the city employees go about their day-to-day work. And sometimes it is a regulatory requirement, but other people have really used it to influence the public's perception of their city, and it's written in a way that's meant to be really accessible and create branding both for residents as well as tourists who are interested in the community, or potential developers, or businesses that might want to be coming to the city. So I think if we are trying to be as accessible as possible, I don't want it to be a footnote in an implementation plan. I want it to be stated really clearly in the list of big goals. But we might be changing or evolving the way we see this plan. But I guess that's where I thought we kind of were earlier on.
So I wonder if there's a way to, and where it would go, is right up front, either in the goals and objectives or someplace, lay out. The overall goal is, we want to be a welcoming community, all that stuff. And again, for economic development, maybe it's, we want to enhance the economic opportunities through a diversified community that includes businesses, arts districts, walkable, and that may be in a bunch of different chapters, but maybe just a broad statement that identifies some of these things that we've talked about in the past, and then we can get into the goals that are a little bit more specific.
Right. I think I like that idea. Although I guess we still at the end of the day need to be able to deliver feedback to them writing it about what those specific things are.
Right.
So.
She doesn't know. Well, no, but I think you're right. We talked about, so the things we've talked about is, attracting high-tech companies, arts district, walkable community. Again, I'm gonna go back to, commercial services that serve our population. Maintaining our restaurant profile in the region.
Being a foodie destination. So. I think we've talked about capitalizing on the diversity of our population in terms of our businesses, being able, in terms of, food offerings and local businesses, small local businesses that offer something unique from other surrounding communities, that's a competitive edge that we have.
And I don't know exactly how to put it, but being a place where people are wanting to stop and spend time, as opposed to a drive-through community.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the goals would be better signage for parking.
Right.
But,
Yeah, and I see, and I'll let Regina chime in on this too, but I kind of see everything you just talked about as part of the implementation. To be able to say, these are the specific things we are planning to do with this plan, because they're supported by these various goals, and really get into the detail of, you know, we want to create an arts district, or we want to create better wayfinding throughout the community so that people can stop and stay, and things.
Where does the implementation plan structurally go? Is it at the end of each chapter? Is it one section that's an implementation plan at the end of the plan? Like, where is this?
If it was up to me, and the way I've done it in other plans, is it's the first thing. It's right after, it's the introduction, and then here's your high
I
priority
see.
implementation.
I see.
But, you know, again, there's no order that this has to go in specifically.
but I
Yeah, I'd say there's no order, but we do have to do it, right? Like, we have to come up with what that is. So it's either we're coming up with those things, either when we do each chapter, ideally, because we've been thinking about it, or we kind of keep things almost in like as we go through each chapter, maybe we do one of these little brainstorming things at the beginning, and then kind of have it in a parking lot or something, and then we kind of build it as we go. And then wherever it lands in the long run, it lands in the long run. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so
It's,
I'll go back to the idea I threw out of a kind of a general statement you know, after the introduction part of this, about these are our overriding goals, and then let's get into, you know, this. Does that not make sense to you, or does it?
I mean, I think it sort of does. I mean, I think, big sort of arching goals, to me, are a lot less specific than saying, we want an arts district. Like, in my mind, that's a action, and it's like, I probably am just like conditioned to not be able to break from that or something, but it's just a matter of specificity. We can say it however we want to say it, but the more we just keep sort of adding like higher level goals at the top, I don't know if that gets us to something more like on the ground, like what are we gonna do, where are we gonna go?
Okay. So do you think that you can implement or get into this chapter the stuff that we've talked about, so that it is stated that, you know, there is, and I get a little bit confused, I guess, about the function of the municipal plan. Is it to say we want an arts district, or is it more we encourage, you know, expansion of the arts or something like that?
Well, I think that's our decision, what level of specificity we go into, right? That's what we've been
But we
talking.
wanna, but again, we wanna be careful that, to me, the municipal plan is a, you know, 10,000-foot look at things. So how specific do we wanna get? You know what I mean? We don't wanna say, we want to do an art district, and we now tie someone's hands to that, because it may or may not happen. We want it to happen, but, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the really tricky thing about these plans are that there are a ton of things that the municipality has to do. And it's difficult to kind of, at the end of the day, in an implementation component of a plan, help the city council understand the amount of, within your resources that you have, how much you wanna put into keeping the train going without derailing, and how much to really try to go do something new, great, and awesome. And I think it's important to have the eye on the new, great, awesome, so that the city doesn't like, end up
Just
with vacant,
indulge.
you know, buildings in the middle of town or something. But it's, it will be one thing to be able to say in this plan, these are these really great things that we want. That might just be a list that sits there and goes nowhere if there isn't an effort made to figure out what does that mean in terms of resources? How much is
Sure.
the city really going to give to that? And it might be hard in a comprehensive plan to get to some of that, but we can we can sort of just keep this stuff, I think, in a parking lot, because once we get through, this is the very first chapter, and we want a tech hub, we want an arts district, we want to make sure we can get more stuff downtown to keep it going and thriving. When we get in the other chapters, we're gonna want to make sure that water and sewer lines are not breaking in the freezing cold. We're gonna wanna make sure that the river doesn't erode away or we encroach on it. We're gonna wanna make sure that we deal with the Elmwood ash or whatever the heck that thing is. You know, it's like, there will end up being a whole lot. But I think it makes sense to sort of have these things identified, and we can, as we sort of work through each chapter, maybe we kind of just keep this list rolling.
Okay.
And then we kind of figure out how we do that, how we marry the goals that we're kind of comfortable with in each chapter with what we're actually gonna do.
So then I propose that as we go through this, we are keeping a separate list called things we definitely want to make sure do not get left out of this plan.
TDLP.
All right, I'm calling it that. Things we definitely want to make sure don't get
Left out of this plan.
out of this plan. Okay. Yeah, so I think we should, maybe we kind of give, every time we're sort of going into a chapter, we give a little space and time to this list
Okay.
and add stuff. And then it'll be, wrestling that list will be difficult at the end, but I say we try.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Okay, so,
So I'm gonna, we're 40 minutes away from 8 o'clock. So do we wanna try to put a wrap on this and move to the infrastructure thing? You know, I don't wanna kill the discussion, but.
Are there key points that you wanted our feedback on from the remaining section of this economic vitality?
just overall, it would really help to know if the statements are kind of feel right, going in the right direction. Were there any that anybody else read that they thought that doesn't sound quite right?
I feel like I could agree with all of the statements here. I feel like they all feel fine. In terms of that level of specificity, they are so high level that just seeing them out of context with the rest of the plan, like I do sort of feel a need to get to like one more level of specificity, but I think that might happen on its own once we've developed more sections, because they will all function together. So I guess I'd say like this is fine for now from my perspective, but I'd like to see how it all comes together as we continue to work.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I think it's a bit of a challenge to try to figure out if this is the right level of detail without being the first chapter. So we may get into more detail in other ones and then need to revisit this to have it be compatible, or we may be at a higher level in other sections and then realize that this is out of whack with that as well. So that's a really good point. It is a little difficult, and economic development or economic vitality is it's a challenging section to start with as well. So
Right.
we may, some of these questions and some of this may just work itself out as we get further into the development of the plan. But it's a good point nonetheless that we don't want to lose sight of.
Okay, so I didn't have any other specific questions on that chapter.
Okay, let's move on. Forge ahead. The always interesting municipal infrastructure.
Okay, so this, chapter, so first and foremost, we need municipal staff to really take a look at this. So I think that's happening, we don't have those comments yet, but we'll have those comments, and get them incorporated, but, so for the most part, the introduction gives a sort of a little snippet of each of the things that are kind of talked about in this chapter. It includes transportation, parking, wastewater, water, stormwater, energy, communication services, and we may also end up doing a little bit of hazard mitigation in here. Because a lot of that is sort of stormwater related and kind of just ties in a little bit. For the insights section specifically, there is all kinds of data we can include here. What I've put in there so far are just a few transportation data points, essentially level of road traffic, just because you do get a lot of people in here in Winooski, but that might not necessarily need to be something that we highlight. Mode that you use to commute to work, so that will really start to get at some of the bike ped use in the city. Transit, how much the bus is used, I think is a useful and interesting thing to keep up front. Then wastewater, sort of the two pieces that we're pointing out there. So a wastewater system, for the most part, functions fine until you hit capacity. So a good thing to know, just generally, is how much capacity is your wastewater system at. The other thing that kicks in with the issue with too much phosphorus in Lake Champlain is that there are specific phosphorus targets that come out of the wastewater treatment plants. So that's another kind of measure that is something to just be aware of, and it's interesting because when you're sort of hitting that target, you might get kicked into doing some improvements in the plant anyway.
I have a comment about the the number of vehicles per day on different streets.
Yep.
I feel that, well, a couple of things. Number one, I think it's really important we include Mallett's Bay if we're gonna do Mallett's Bay Avenue, if we're gonna do a breakout of different streets, just because it's one of our gateway districts. So I think it needs to be emphasized, and because we wanna encourage development along Mallett's Bay, showing what the traffic looks like there, I think is important. Secondly, I recently came across a document, and I don't remember from which report it's on, but it might be the document that you were using to get these numbers.
Mhm.
Some report the city did that had a map of the city with color-coded streets, showing traffic numbers, so it was a little bit more comprehensive because it had like a key and every major street was color-coded, and maybe we could just include that graphic in here, and that would, you know, take care of that issue.
Yeah, that's definitely in the transportation master plan.
Maybe I was reading the transportation master plan,
Yeah.
but that's, I think might be, you know, solve the problem of choosing what do we consider a main road or connector, is
Yeah.
just say like, here's the
Yep.
map. Yeah, so that's my only comment on that section.
Okay, great.
Although I did wanna discuss the parking at the beginning, at some point, but that might be a longer conversation, so we can come back to it.
Under the introduction, you mean?
Yeah,
Okay.
or in general, how we're going to talk about parking in this plan.
I am fine.
Going into that?
Yeah, because
Okay.
it's mentioned a few times, so whichever place we want to put
Yeah.
it works.
So, having not been around for as long as some people here,
Like who?
I
You're talking about-
don't know all of the the issues surrounding parking. What I do know is that in terms of, and I see the approach taken in this introduction is providing the facts about the usage of our garage, which is useful. But I do know that we have a bad reputation regionally as being a best place that is very difficult to park. And a lot of people say they avoid coming to downtown Winooski because they don't want to deal with parking. I think that if we're gonna have a section on parking, regardless of whether we think that their concerns are overblown or we think they're legitimate or not, I do think we have to address that perception head on and provide a clear response to it in this plan, especially if this is a public facing document. Rather than like the way I read it now, it's kind of, it is saying, maybe this is the response, but I think we need to do a little bit more to kind of explain why people have those concerns and come back with something a little bit more detailed.
I hear what you're saying, I'm not, maybe I need to rephrase it, because I don't know as we need to answer those things, but I think we need to put out there what's available and the way the system is set up, and maybe aspirations. There's not enough parking to support business downtown, which is, by the way, a nice problem, because if we had too much parking, we'd have an empty
Nobody
downtown.
here.
But anyway, it's clear that we need more parking downtown or a different system. And so I think to address those concerns through that kind of thing, as opposed to, I don't think we want to get into, there's a perception that you can't park in Winooski. I think it's more we want to just lay out the facts.
So maybe we don't need to explicitly say it, but I think that like some of the concerns that are there may influence the way we approach the section. So if we look at why do people say that? In my experience, a couple things. One is a surprisingly large percentage of people are not aware that there is a garage in Winooski.
Yep.
That's a
That's huge.
sizable percentage.
Yep.
So then we need to say why is that? Is there something we can say so that we can address that issue in here? And then, the second thing, at least in my demographic of people with small children, I find that another issue is finding spaces that are located close to the place that they're going, so that if they have a car seat or a stroller, it's easier to access. And I don't know if we have any solution to that, but we might want to put something in terms of not just thinking about parking in terms of, as we continue to develop things in terms of number of spaces in the downtown, but making sure that we factor in accessibility of parking spaces to specific businesses or something like that. I just like to think, and I'm sure everyone else has stories about the people they know and why they complain about parking in Winooski, but maybe this is an opportunity to brainstorm on some of those issues.
Yeah, I agree. There should be some language to reflect correctly on what we as the city we want to see parking or our goals. There's also a lot of confusion among people in the community. I have seen some people, some restaurant owners. You come and eat in my restaurant, and it's okay for you to park. If you get a ticket, just let me know. They have that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Here in Winooski.
Here in
Really?
Winooski.
They do that?
And I don't know what they do, but
do they pay the parking
I haven't
fee?
faced that problem, but
Where did you see this in Winooski?
this bistro down there.
Mopac was doing that as well with Frank's.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, Frank's as well. Yeah.
Huh.
So that seems pretty indicative of the fact that they're getting customer complaints or something, that I think we need to think about that.
But if you
Yeah.
read this, what it says here about parking, it makes it look like there's plenty of parking. So,
No, we don't.
Well, that's what I was saying, that if this is true, but we're still in this situation, the question is why, and we need, is it that people don't know where the parking garage is, or that the parking garage exists? And if that's the case, maybe we need to say something about increasing signage or that kind of thing for the parking garage. Or maybe it's that the parking garage is inadequate in its location to serve certain businesses. I don't know. But I mean, it does seem to be a core issue in the city. And also, thinking outside of the downtown, the other thing that you see on Front Porch Forum a lot that I might want to add something about, maybe it's in the wayfinding section, maybe this isn't the right place for it, but there have been a lot of complaints about lack of clear signage about parking, and people getting ticketed, and it is a problem in a lot of parts of the city where signs are falling down, or there's trees that have grown right in front of the signs, and people get ticketed, and saying something about, you know, because we've developed a bad reputation for ticketing people, and I think in situations that are somewhat ambiguous due to signage and other things, so I think we should maybe use this as an opportunity to comment on that.
So have you seen any of the parking studies and stuff that have been done in the city, either Eric or Regina?
Yeah, I read them, that's
This
where
must
this
have-
comes from.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, there have been, for at least 10 years, this has been an issue, and it's been bannered about how we're gonna deal with it, and there's been studies done, and there's been this and that. But the bottom line is, I think you're right, is we need more parking downtown. We especially need more parking on the west side of Main Street. The problem is where? So,
Well, I mean, that is a problem that needs to be solved, and we're not gonna necessarily solve it in this plan, but what we could do is by stating that we need parking on the west side, for example, if the city decided that that was something that they wanted to prioritize and they had an idea for it, then perhaps they could endeavor to get grants or other things to support such an initiative, like building a public garage or something like that down the road, if we stated that it was a need,
oh, I think we need to state that it's a need for sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
right?
Okay. And part of this too is that it really will be helpful to have staff read this, because the studies say one thing, but where the city council is today and what they're doing and where they're going with it, I don't know yet. So hopefully we get the proper reviews of this stuff that we need in order to help us understand where they're going right now and, you know, complete the whole picture about where we want to go.
To that, I'll just say that I have passed this along to the Public Works folks, so they are reviewing it to provide comments and feedback.
All right, so any other, probably hard to answer, but any other kind of data points about the city's infrastructure that you'd want to see? You know, we can get a lot of the parking message sort of in this insights piece too, like if we're really pretty clear about how much parking there is, how much it's actually utilized, but the perception is still whatever. Like we can do it kind of quickly, easily, graphic based to try to get the point in here too.
Maybe I'm not seeing it because I'm not reading carefully enough, but is there something in here about sidewalks?
No, I
Where
don't
is
think
that?
so.
Because I feel like that's something that
We've talked
really
about-
needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
There's
Yes.
a lot of streets that don't even have sidewalks on one side of the street. And, in a lot of areas, some of the sidewalks are in pretty
Rough shape.
bad shape, yeah, and so I know that that's come up at some of the, transportation meetings that I was at.
Planning commission too.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, we've
Mhm.
talked, I think all of us have felt that that's a really important thing to put into this
Mhm.
plan.
Okay.
And it actually reminds me of another thing we've talked about that I don't think I read in here either, which is a long-term vision of moving electrical lines underground. And I may add something about, thinking when thinking about adding green spaces when possible along pedestrian corridors, which could go into a different section, but that is something that's obviously a major part of our Main Street redevelopment plan, and I think would be worth mentioning as something we'd like to think about in other areas as well.
Well, and on that, didn't we have a conversation about, I'll use the term parklets?
Yeah,
There was a front porch forum.
There's
because there's gonna be a
something-
pop-up
that.
coming
Yeah.
soon, I wanna say in August, is that? do you
I
know
believe
what
it's
they
gonna
said?
start in August, yeah, there's gonna be, if I remember correctly, it's gonna be up on Main Street, just south of where, the new building at 348, I'm blanking on the restaurant that just went up there.
Faux
Fodang, yes, thank you. Yeah, just south of that.
On which side of the street is that?
I believe
Is
it's
it
gonna be on the same
same-
side as Fodang, yeah.
The new Foden?
Yes,
It's moved, okay.
yeah,
Yeah, it
the
has.
new one.
Has anything moved into the place it moved out of, or?
I don't think anything's going to,
I
it's
think
gonna
they're gonna
probably
tear it.
get knocked down in some.
We're in the process of demolishing.
Yeah. Regina, on the energy thing, can I assume you're gonna have in the RPCs, you've got here the analysis targets and maps, but
Yeah,
I think, if I remember right, we're pretty close to our target, right?
I
in
think-
Winooski?
you have met your low target
Yeah,
already,
yeah, okay.
yeah.
Well,
So, you
I
have
think a lot of it is
half
because
this
of the,
dam.
a lot of it is because of the dam.
Yeah,
How electric is in Winooski, right?
you get it
Yeah.
split, half Winooski, half Burlington, in terms of
That's
your
right.
generation.
But the core where the turbines are in Winooski. So I think we get a lot of credit for that. Anyway. But, yeah.
I was just thinking, I should have, when I reviewed this, compared this document side by side with our bullet point list that we had developed. And I didn't, but I think it would be useful in our meetings to like always just have a copy of that with us, because I guess I'm realizing as we're talking about this, is that I'm pretty sure that like we may have had bullet points on some of these topics on that list that didn't get into this draft, and I think it'd be useful just to have that side by side so we could compare and make sure.
Yeah, so I
everything's
tried to do that, and it's mostly gonna be in the goals and objectives where
I
I
see.
brought that stuff in.
Okay.
I might not have gotten all of it for sure, so I'm
Right.
not saying to not do that, 'cause
covered.
that's a
Yeah,
good
'cause
idea.
I mean, a lot of those were based on conversations where you weren't here, so you may
Yeah.
not have heard all the background of what, but.
Yeah, so, so two things. A lot of that mostly is, I look at that stuff in the sort of goals and objectives section.
Okay.
But the other thing too is at the last meeting, we sort of landed on this place where the goals and objectives should be a little bit like high level and not specific. And a lot of that stuff on your list is specific. So we have to sort of ultimately, at the end of the day, figure out where we're going with the specificity.
Right.
So,
Well, so then that might end up, some of those items might end up on that other list that we created
Yeah,
tonight.
which is fine, like I think we should just keep talking about that and sort of figure out how it ultimately, where it all ultimately lands.
Okay.
So what might make the most sense for this section is to just go, let's drop right down into the goals then.
Where I do see sidewalks mentioned. So
Yeah.
there it is. I guess I just didn't read far enough.
Yeah.
Well, except for it just says, improved and maintained,
Mhm.
not added,
Right, and we had like talked about the possibility of putting the specific goal, we want every street in the
Mhm,
city to have a sidewalk
Right.
on at least one side.
on at least one side, yeah.
Well, it does say improved and maintained, so I mean, that could, it's a general statement, but anyway.
Okay, but that's a good point. I mean, I like it. I like it as a goal statement for sure.
That's what a goal statement's supposed to say, isn't it? What we want.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts about these? So again, so this list essentially is coming from the Public Works Commission, plus added in some things that kind of came off of your list, and just tried to hit some things that seemed kind of like they sort of were missing a little bit. What's included at the very bottom of this are the specific goal statements from the transportation plan and the actions from the parking study, just so you have them for reference. But I think if we're gonna kind of go with this strategy that we talked about at the last meeting, this list of 10 kind of hits the level that we're trying to get at least for these statements anyway.
So the transportation master plan goals plus 27 actions is something that's not gonna be in this plan, but referenced, is that right?
Yep.
That's what the recommendation is, that we don't include those.
Unless there's just a couple items we really do want to include, which,
Correct.
yeah, then we can.
Yeah, and those 27 actions are not, from the transportation master plan, are not included in here, but there are, they did a good job in that plan. There's 27, which is not enormous, but, there's high-level actions, medium, low, so they really did a good job prioritizing, what's in there. So it's possible to pull in the high-level ones if we wanted to get to that level of specificity, but we can figure that out. Then 8, 9, and 10 are not from the Public Works Commission necessarily, but just trying to hit on some other things that either came off of your list or want to make sure it's worked in there. And that number 8 is about parking, and so I don't necessarily know if what the parking plan says is where the city has been headed, or if what the transportation master plan says is where the city is heading, but we could figure that out, get some input from city staff about where they're headed, and then make that larger point that we talked about earlier. I think also number 9 could probably be sort of 2 separate things. That first point about support utility improvements in conjunction with municipal infrastructure improvements. So that's where you're gonna see things like, if it can happen, if there's money to underground utilities, that's how that's gonna happen. If there's a way to put in sort of added green spaces, that's how that kind of thing is gonna happen. We might wanna separate the second part of that, which is really more about telecommunications and really trying to support something like a tech hub by having the right amount of infrastructure in place for that to happen.
I think that kind of makes sense to split them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Erica had a great comment about at the forefront of what, and I was like, I don't know, so I left it. But we'll rework that for sure.
Better than the back front.
Right.
And so just, for For undergrounding utilities, it's definitely one of those things that's like awesome, of course, like that's where you wanna go. It's but it's also one of those things that might be like a tough tie in your hands kind of thing if we're, depending on how we're saying it in the plan, you know?
Sure. I mean, the way we talked about it before is like, if we said that like, something along the lines of like, when portions, like when sidewalks are being redeveloped, to when possible move, electrical lines and utilities underground, so that we can work towards having more underground, like,
Right.
not like we're gonna undertake a giant project to move them underground, but like,
Yeah.
when there are
In conjunction.
opportunities, like, or if a developer's putting in a big building and they have to dig about the whole sidewalk anyway, to then say, let's move them underground when that's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
So like, that was kind of the context of that conversation. I'm not saying I have the exact phrasing, but,
Yeah,
Yeah, when the opportunity, and I think funding is important because that's a big up there, so.
yeah.
yeah, and I would just say it's, when the city is just going to improve sidewalks or having to pull up sidewalks, the sidewalk is like it's like the outer part of the skin, the easiest, like, no problem, we can handle that. That does not necessarily mean there will be the ability to underground utility lines
I
just
see.
for a sidewalk project. It's like, the sidewalk replacement is maybe 5% of the cost of that
I
effort.
see.
It's monumental,
Got it.
putting utility lines underground.
Which is why.
Even though you
Sadly.
think it wouldn't be because you think the utility companies would wanna do that, but
Yeah,
not so much.
yeah.
Hanging on poles is a lot easier.
Wasn't, am I right, I think undergrounding utilities on Main Street was $4 million?
I don't know the exact number, but it's, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think that was the number, just undergrounding, so.
Yeah.
A lot of parts of the country where everything is underground to begin with.
Yeah, yeah. It's easy, super easy when you start. That's why that side of the city is all taken care of, but like, if you don't do it right from right from the beginning, it's
Yeah.
rough.
Right.
Okay, let me just check my list to make sure if I have any other specific questions. Okay, so, I don't have any other specific questions, but, so let's just take a few minutes. Are there anything on the, like, where you wanna go, action parking lot list that we should include? We got the sidewalks,
Green spaces.
green spaces,
Underground utilities,
undergrounding utilities, I put all these up here.
parking on the west side of Main Street. Or was that a separate issue just with parking related?
I mean, we should probably put it down, but it's related to the lack of parking.
Okay, anything else?
I guess, I mean,
Trees?
transportation is right at the beginning, but, just sort of emphasis on the bike routes, because that was there was a lot of voices at the transportation meetings about that, so
Yep,
I see it here, but, I just like to put in a plug for, that it could be a little bigger.
yep.
Um,
And, I'm hearing you say emphasize more in the text, cause it's kind of not really even in here.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then-
even more than just bikes, like, complete streets, because that was definitely, there was a lot of talk about that at the transportation meetings that I attended.
Okay, and then, from a perspective of, like, is there a thing that you really wanna see happen?
North, south, east, west connections.
Okay.
I mean, that's me personally.
Yeah,
um,
Off-street, I mean, I'd love to see the path go through Cassavant and up and connect.
Bike commuters are not going to use it.
If it's, I think, I'm gonna disagree with you, if it's well done and it's maintained.
It has nothing to do with being well done and well maintained. It has to do with the ease of use, and it has to do with not having to navigate around people with strollers, people on rollerblades, people who are looking at their cell phones while they're out in nature.
So
That's the
if
issue.
you can come over the bridge, bang a left down Winooski Falls Way, get onto a path that takes you up to Route 15 and connects with another path that takes you out to Essex, you don't think they'd use that?
I honestly, I don't think that a serious bike commuter is going to, and I also think that if we're gonna be forward-thinking about the future of transportation in Chittenden County, that bikes need to have a safe place on the roads to travel. I just do. I know it's gonna slow you guys down in your cars, but the reality of the situation is that it has to be safe for cyclists to be on the road, because the safer it is for cyclists to be on the road, the more people are gonna get out of their cars and start biking around and and use it. Just like we were talking about with Main Street,
Yeah.
a safe way for kids to get to school,
Mhm.
protected bike lanes so kids can get to school.
So,
That, and
yeah.
I'm just telling you from
No,
my
no, I
experience
understand.
of biking into Burlington, I do use Riverside Avenue, I use the bike path.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you how many clueless people are walking around,
Oh.
looking at their cell phones, pushing a stroller, and I'm ringing my bell, or people are running in the middle of the bike path, and I'm ringing my bell, and nobody hears me, and I nearly hit them before they even notice that I'm there. And that's the
You get a
kind of.
foghorn, a real loud one.
But that's the issue with having sort of a rec path.
Yeah.
And honestly, if I'm not pulling a trailer when I'm coming down Riverside Avenue, I will be in traffic and I will be doing almost 20 miles an hour, where on the rec path, I have to do like 10 because people are not paying attention because it's a rec path. So, no, I think, and hopefully Regina will agree with me on this, that it needs to be on the road.
Well, regardless, I think, personally, I think, I'm gonna call it a rec path, bike ped path, whatever you wanna call it, along, through Cassavant up to Route 15, as well as one along the river this way into Colchester.
Yeah, I think that regardless of whether, I think I agree with that goal, just in terms of pedestrian access to those places.
I do too,
Yeah.
but not for
Well,
commuters.
I'm gonna call it a rec path, and, whatever it is, that's fine, but I do believe that it would be very nice if we had one that went along the river,
Yeah.
and the easements are actually in place for a lot of that kind of thing from Winooski to Colchester. The difficulty is this little strip right here along West Canal Street, because it's so narrow. And, so steep, so, but
Yeah.
to me, that's always been a goal, is to get around.
Just,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I mean, I think they can be two different things. I mean, there is without a doubt regionally identified, a major challenge on Route 15 for bike
Mhm.
computers, no.
Commuters? Commuters are computers. That's the
Commuters.
problem, the bikers who are on their computers while they're riding.
No doubt. So that, I mean, I think that, that concept is on everybody's radar. I don't think there would be a challenge in putting it in the plan, I wouldn't think. And then this seems like almost like another concept, like that would be awesome if that could happen, for sure. So sorry.
I was just gonna say, not on that particular topic, but just thanks for this list. I mentioned it before, I just wanna make sure, I don't know if it's the right section for it, but again, clear signage for parking throughout the city. And something that we have not really discussed, but I just wanted to briefly bring up again regarding parking is, I know when we were there were public, comments, for when we were talking about the economic development plan. People talked about, some people came in to I remember a group of people talking about having difficulty as residents, say going to the post office, which is why we put in those 15-minute spots, but a lot of people have trouble getting the spots when they're going in to go to the post office or whatever. And one thing that I just like to think about maybe putting into this plan is saying something about making sure that residents have, easy access to, our downtown commercial center. I don't know if I have a solution for that, but like, thoughts on like whether there are, residents could get a pass to park for 15 minutes in any spot, so they could run an errand or something like that, would be something for the city council to figure out downtown over time, but just making sure that, we think about the residents' use of different downtown spaces, specifically. I know for me that I don't go to the Winooski post office because it's too much of a hassle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we use it every day.
Yeah, if we
You
want to
do?
keep a post
Yeah.
office, then, yeah.
Do you drive to it or do you walk to it?
Sometimes we walk to it and sometimes we drive to it, but even when you are driving to it, either there's limited parking
Yeah,
spots out there.
there's spaces there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just, like, I'm not gonna go to the machine to pay to, like, drop off a letter at the post office, like, that would just take a
That's
20-second
right.
error, so like,
That's
if
right.
if there was a resident pass that said, like, I could park in any spot for 10, 15 minutes, rather than have to park in only, like, the one 15-minute spot, then, like, I'd be more
Mhm.
inclined to use the post office, instead I just drive to South Burlington, where there's a parking lot, it's much easier. But like, I mean, it was a comment that a lot of people said, like, we don't go downtown to, like, run errands, because, like, we could just drive somewhere else, and, like, I think especially for Winooski residents, that we might wanna think about, and I'm not implementing I'm not making a suggestion, I'm just saying,
Right.
making sure that residents have access to downtown as part of this, like, infrastructure goal, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I have one thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this has gone to the notice of the city. It probably has the intersection between Mallet's Bay and Union Street.
Are you gonna bring up my favorite topic,
Site
The-
the
distance.
horrible flashing light?
Not the flashing light. That's another thing. But
The site distance.
the workshop there, the car mechanic.
Oh, yeah.
They park their trucks, their
Oh,
vehicles.
that's,
the
I
old
know all
vehicles,
about that.
And the tow trucks all around in people's parking, in the street parking.
Yeah.
Not to say the people's parking, but the street parking.
Mm-hmm.
And the residents can't park, and they are there for months and months and months.
Yeah,
They don't move them.
Mm.
That's a big problem there.
yes.
That's a huge
Well,
problem.
that's part of making sure that there's adequate parking for
Yeah.
residents. I live in that
Correct.
neighborhood, and our parking's a nightmare. I live right
Mhm.
on that intersection, actually, so,
Mhm.
agreed. But,
That's been a
It's on both
problem
sides.
for
It's
50
on,
years.
Union Street and on Mallet's Bay Ave on both sides.
I thought you were gonna talk about Spring Street and Hall Street, especially when you come to the end of Spring Street and you try to see the cars coming from downtown, and you've got that concrete wall. It's like, okay, I'll sneak out a little bit.
so that does remind, not to go on to my list of, into
Mhm.
specific grievances, but it does, related to infrastructure, like, that, making decisions that are appropriate for the kind of, making, like, signage decisions or transportation, like, I'm not sure, what's the word for, like, streetlights, blanking on the term, but like, a flashing red light, for example,
Mhm.
is not typical in a residential area. Those almost exclusively exist in,
Yeah.
industrial areas. That light is like flashing 24/7 like this, right in this intersection. Someone that lives in that neighborhood, and I've talked to Jesse about this, that light lights up my entire bedroom like this every night. And I did a lot of research on this, and that's not a typical kind of feature in a residential area, because it does have all sorts of environmental impacts on the way people live, which has all sorts of trickle-down effects for residents, like not being able to get good sleep, or, and that can affect an entire community. So in making decisions on what kind of street lighting to use and other traffic
Traffic control devices, yeah.
thinking about appropriate use for the type of neighborhood that one is in.
That's a tough one, and I'm not disagreeing with it, because there is a commercial aspect of that area.
And it's
that-
gonna be more so when that
Yeah.
area starts to get more
Okay.
developed.
Sure,
But it's a four-way stop, so you would think maybe they could put stop signs instead.
stop signs, eventually, if we're gonna have the traffic we hope on Malice Bay, a actual stoplight could be.
Well, there used to be,
There used to be.
before, way before your time, there was a light there. And all that light did was flash yellow when it was there, and that was, as far as I understand, it was changed to the flashing red because it was a traffic calming to get people to slow down on Malice Bay Avenue, because before that was like that.
Yeah,
People were zipping along. You could
Right.
come in from Colchester and be doing 45 until you get up here to the police station. So that's why that's like that. And just in terms of, I mean, this is totally off topic, but I understand, I feel your pain about that, because some new house went up across the street from us, and there's a light that's on, shining into my bedroom 24/7. That light is on, and there's nothing I can do about it because it's on private property. So I understand what you're saying, but on the other hand, like, that was
Oh,
what,
sure.
that's the reason for that, and a
but
stop
there,
sign.
so I talked to Jesse about it, and I think everyone agrees the best solution, if it works for the cost, is you would put a light there, an actual traffic light that is, they have, like, a motion sensitive one, so if there was a vehicle coming up down Union Street or on West Lane, then it would
It would
change,
cycle. Mhm.
but otherwise it would keep Malice Bay pretty free, but that's just a more expensive device, and that's
right.
why it wasn't put in. You know, I've said to her, you know, considering our vision for Malice Bay, which is to develop it as a corridor, like, maybe those kind of infrastructural improvements are worth considering investing in. That's a
Down the
decision.
road.
I think
Yeah.
Terry's right on the reason it was put in. It was a light that wasn't doing its job. That was great. And the stop signs, the problem is coming this way, and you're kind of going over the hill,
You
and there's
can't.
cars parked
Yeah.
there. You can't see them, so the light was there so that it would stop the traffic and it could be seen.
Right,
So,
right. I'm not gonna say there aren't good reasons for it, but I am saying that I think all of those concerns should be taken into.
take the lights out of the light that's facing Union Street, put a stop sign there, so it's blinking from Mount Bay Avenue, but you come,
Yeah.
we digress.
Yeah, sorry.
So,
Yeah. Sorry, everyone.
And now we're over time.
now we're
My
closing
fault.
out.
So I didn't have any other specific questions, so.
So we'll review at the next meeting. Okay.
Just as a question, you all are okay with Regina's note about not including the transportation master plan goals in this document? The last couple of pages?
Yeah, I think we mentioned a few
Yeah.
things from there that
Okay.
we'd like to see, but.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay, review of schedule for upcoming meetings regarding planned chapters. So our next meeting will be review of this.
Correct, yeah, August 9th will be our next meeting. We will do our second review on infrastructure based on comments from tonight, and we will incorporate the comments from Public Works,
Staff.
from staff as well, for that meeting, and then we will start the discussion on the safe, healthy, and connected people.
Good,
Sounds great.
okay. So looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
You give a second, right? Okay.
He
So,
wants to stay here another hour.
all in favor? All in
Aye.
favor? Okay, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.